Hello, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to yet another monthly wrap-up, my friends. So excited to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of June with you. And by all of the books, I mean about half of the books, because I read 20 books this month, which I don't think is quite as many as May, which is fine. We're still on track. We're still doing pretty well. My reading challenge probably says something much different than what I'm telling you right now. But yeah, I'm going to talk to you about 10 of the 20 books that I read this month. Books that I feel like deserve just a little bit of extra attention, or books that I didn't talk enough about on my channel. At the end of the video, I will let you know what other books that I read that I'm not talking about here. So if you want to hear my thoughts and feelings on other stuff, you can go and check out those videos where I talked about those books. It's a chaotic reading month. I mean, I'm just going to say it point blank. It was a little chaotic in terms of the amount of different genres I read. I feel like definitely different than my normal fare with reading. There were some real stinkers and there were some really good books, which I feel like is kind of every month, but huge dichotomy this month. Okay, let's get into it. Let's get into it. First up, we have Annie Bot. This book I read for my science fiction video, which I'll remind you about again at the end of the video. This one just stuck with me so much that I feel like I needed to touch on it again. This book's about our main character Annie, who is a sex robot, essentially a companion, an AI companion for this guy who got out of a really long-term relationship. He might have been married before. I can't remember if it was married or just a long-term relationship. He's not really like looking for love, but he is looking for someone to fuck, I guess. So this AI robot is learning his behaviors, learning his habits, and is responding accordingly, yet also kind of getting a mind of her own, because there are two different modes you can set your sex robot to. I think they call them cuddle bunnies. You can set them to either just function the way that they're programmed, or to learn from your behaviors and to, I guess, start developing like autonomy and or like a personality. Annie in this book starts to do that. And it is so fascinating. Not only does it raise really interesting questions about AI and what it means to actually be alive, it also really raises questions about the patriarchy and also just about women's role in relationships. I think that was probably the more heartbreaking and or interesting thing to me about this whole book, was the way that at the beginning of the book, Annie feels like she is just an appendage to the guy that she is with, how she feels like she needs to do just the right things so that she can please him. And it's definitely an abusive relationship, I would say, especially early on. Oh, it is just so interesting too, the way we get into like the male psyche. It's like some therapy scenes that are just fascinating and horrible to read. This book, I think, really surprised me. I went in not expecting much because the reviews for this book were very middling. Everybody's just like, it's okay. But for me, I really enjoyed this, and I personally think science fiction is at its best when it is taking science and technology and using that as a way to question, obviously, what's going on in the real world, what's going on in our reality. This one was maybe a little heavy-handed with its messaging and its themes, but I personally really enjoyed it, and I think that if you are a bit of a misandrist, you might enjoy this too. I thought it was like a really triumphant story ultimately at the end, so I really liked this one, and this is a book that I think is not going to get enough love. It just came out this year, but it should, because it is genuinely so fascinating, and I quite enjoyed it. As a non-science fiction reader, I thought it was great, so I gave that one, I can't remember if it was 4 stars. I think I gave some 4 stars. I could be making that up. I honestly don't remember how I rated this, but probably 4 stars. It was really great. Next up was a book that I fucking hated. I read this over on my vlog channel and I wanted to bring my thoughts and feelings here. I'm reading this one for a list video, as one does, and by one I mean me, because I'm unhinged. Untamed is a memoir by Glennon Doyle. It's, I believe, her second memoir, and is, I don't want to say the antithesis to the first one she wrote, but she does talk a lot in this one about how that first one was just like her trying to save her marriage, and this one is really about her being like untamed woman that she is. It's told in vignettes and like little stories, little like mini essays, I guess, about this woman who feels deeply unhappy in her life and in her marriage, in some of the decisions she's making. Really what this is about is like getting out of that marriage, marrying a woman instead, kind of her path to find her wife, who is, I believe, an Olympian, Abby Wambach, soccer player. I don't know. There's so much to say about this one. As someone who is perhaps at times annoyingly introspective and brings that energy to the internet, it's hard to criticize this without it feeling hypocritical. However, it's just one of those books where you read and you're like, are you just trying to justify all the shit that you've gotten yourself into and all the poor decisions you're making? It was kind of hard to read, especially from someone at this person's age. And I know that age doesn't necessarily mean maturity, again, as evidenced by the book, but it was just kind of challenging to like relate to, understand, or enjoy any of this book. I think the point was to like teach women that they should be untamed and you should not have to listen to what men have to say. I just don't like the way in which this book handled that. I feel like, go read Annie Bot, like don't read Untamed. Untamed just feels, I say, heavy on the white feminism as well. It's just not my cup of tea. And I'm not trying to hate because it's nonfiction and I don't rate my nonfiction, but if I did, this would be like 1 star. I just really deeply did not understand or enjoy this one. It has touched a lot of people. I have a couple of people who I follow on Instagram who I remember talking about this book when it came out and feeling really empowered by it. All the more power to you, because I think that nonfiction speaks to all of us in different ways, as does like every book ever. But this one spoke another language that I hated. So let's talk about Leviathan Wakes. This is another book that I read for my science fiction video. I did want to just like come back to it because this is really remarkable science fiction, and I'm not groundbreaking when I say that because a lot of people really enjoyed this one. But I think if you are trying to find a science fiction book that has an interesting plot line that does very grand things, I think this would really strike your fancy, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. So this book's about 2 white men, I believe. Actually, no, they're white. I'm gonna assume. It's about 2 men. One is the captain of a ship. He's not the captain at first, but he becomes captain of a ship. He is out in space and he comes across this ship that has basically been abandoned in space when he is mining for ice, I think. And that sends him down a whole trajectory that I don't want to get into because I don't want to spoil the plot for you. And there's this other guy who is tasked with finding a wealthy family's daughter who's gone missing. These 2 men end up kind of converging and crossing paths when their stories converge, I guess, like when they have a reason to converge. I'm not doing a great job at explaining this. When am I ever, especially when it comes to something as like complex as a science fiction book, being, you know, especially the first book in a series. What I want to say about this one is that despite it being confusing at times, despite this one probably not being an all-time favorite for me, I was impressed by this book. Upon reflection, I do consider whether or not I want to read more books in this series because this one did kind of intrigue me. I won't lie. And I really appreciate how there is so much stuff going on. I think my initial feelings when I finished this book were that, God, there's so much going on. It's kind of confusing. I feel like, you know, it could have been tamed down a little bit. But honestly, I love the way that this book set up future books. There's some loose threads that I am just desperate to see how they get woven into the rest of the story. I don't know. I liked this one. I can't remember what I rated this one either, but I think I'm going to give this one 4 stars if I haven't already rated it. Honestly, looking back, I don't know that I rated any of the books in my science fiction video, which like that's on me, frankly, but 4 stars. This was fun. A book that I didn't talk about anywhere, actually, was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Don't know how to feel about this one. This was it felt like nonfiction book, but it was a fiction book about the son of a Vietnamese refugee kind of writing a story or like writing a letter to his mother, talking about, honestly, like their relationship and dynamic and his experience living in America. It was very beautifully told. This book is one that I always see people gushing about on Goodreads and everywhere else, and I didn't really know what to expect going into it because from the way this book had been peddled to me, I was expecting it to be a little life-y, you know what I mean? Like so dark and just needlessly depressing. This didn't feel like that. This actually felt very well balanced in, I think, maybe the way the story was told, right? The imagery that's used in this story and the way that our narrator is able to convey emotion can make really depressing moments in life really beautiful, and it made it easier to read. That being said, it's still not necessarily my kind of book. I'm not someone who really gravitates towards deeply depressing literary fiction. It's just not really my wheelhouse, not really my cup of tea. I do like that this one sort of like pushed my boundaries and got me to appreciate a genre that I'm not normally into, but I wouldn't say that this book is going to have like the most lasting impact on me. It's one that I definitely wanted to talk about. It's not one that I think is going to be like an Annie bot, right? A book that I'm like thinking about every once in a while, just out of context, I guess. It's a hard one. It's a hard one for me to rate. It's a hard one for me to really love, but it's a book that I'm glad that I read. And I guess like ultimately what I take away from this one is that I read a book that a lot of people seem to really enjoy. I got to experience that for myself and see if it's something I really enjoy. And while it wasn't perfect for me, I'm surprised at how much I did actually like this one and like appreciate what it did. It's like I was gonna say I don't rate nonfiction. This isn't nonfiction. I think I'd probably give this one like 3 stars. I thought that, again, beautifully told. It was a story that I feel like is going to resonate and last for a lot of people in their mind, but for me just like wasn't the most impactful. Does that make me heartless? I'm not quite sure, but 3 stars. I always forget how hot my camera gets in my car in the summer, so hopefully we can fly through these next 6 books. Honestly, looking at what we have to talk about, I don't think that's gonna be much of a challenge. First up, we have Butcher and Blackbird by Bren Weaver. I just saw that this book got optioned and and it's going to be probably made into a movie, which is a terrifying thought. Although I hope that in the spirit and in the trend of adaptations lately, that we'll get an improvement from the book into the TV show, movie, whatever the fuck this gets made into. This book is about not really rival, two serial killers who fall in love. That's, I guess, the gist of it. That's kind of what this book is about. Did I enjoy it? Fuck no. Do I have a whole reading vlog on this book? Absolutely yes, I do. I guess I wanted to talk about this one specifically again because I want to reiterate how bad I thought this book was. I appreciated the beginning of this book. I was excited to see where this was going to go. I loved the kind of tongue-in-cheek nature of it at the beginning, the kind of like goofiness of the story. It could easily be like corny. Okay, it kind of was corny. It could have been even worse, I think, if this book had taken itself too seriously, but I think it was still bad because of the way that the romance was executed in this book. What I've been noticing is that a lot of authors want to write a romance that's different and yet don't seem to understand what makes a romance a romance. The hero and heroine spend very little time talking, very little time actually falling in love, and their romance is not befitting their personalities or their proclivities, shall we say, right? Okay, picture this. Imagine this. You're a serial killer, right? What made you become that way, right? Like, what's your motivation here? What's the psychology behind that? Is that psychology going to lend itself well to you falling in love? Methinks not. Doesn't mean that you can't fall in love, but I don't think it's going to mean that your relationship is going to be normal or necessarily healthy or necessarily something that should be imitated. And I think that this book wanted to be different and yet wasn't actually willing to fully go there. That kind of upsets me, frankly. Like, if you're gonna do something funky and weird, fully fucking go there. Like, be weird, be funky, be strange. Show us the dysfunction. Show us how people who are deeply psychologically disturbed are going to actually have a successful romantic relationship. This one was just like, oh, they kill people in their spare time because it's like fun, but they also like to kiss and they also have best friends and like normal 9-to-5 jobs. Like, don't forget that. Like, he might kill people, but he also likes to cook food. It doesn't make sense. It simply does not make sense. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, frankly, but I do think there should be some semblance of, like, I don't know, reality in this kind of story. Maybe I'm wrong. You tell me in the comments down below if you think I'm wrong, but I don't even know what the fuck I rated it. 2 stars. It wasn't the worst thing I'd ever read, frankly. It was entertaining enough, but definitely not like high rating material. And I don't think that I left on the list the second book. I don't even know if I put the second book on my list of books that I've read this month. Okay, maybe I've read 21 books. Go off, Queen. No, I DNF'd it. That's why. Okay, anyway, Leather and Lark sucked. That's all we really need to know here. Moving on to the rom-commers. This book was also really irritating, and it's a trend, again, I'm seeing in books. Authors setting out to write a romance and then not actually writing a romance. This book is about our two main characters, Emma and Charlie. Emma is helping Charlie rewrite his screenplay. He is someone who is renowned for screenplays. All of his movies have gone on to be very successful award winners, and he is just like lauded in the industry. Emma is really talented, but is unfortunately, I was gonna say unfortunately, the caretaker for her father. I wouldn't say it's unfortunate. She likes taking care of her father, but her father got in an accident years ago and now is unable to care for himself. So she is the sole caretaker essentially of her dad and is not able to like go to Hollywood and or like get her career off the ground in the way that she wants to. But her friend is the manager of Charlie and he wrote this really shitty rom-com and she's gonna go to his place, help him, I guess, like rewrite the screenplay so it won't ruin his reputation, whatever. He also like needs to get this screenplay done because the only way that he's going to get a different screenplay made into a film is if he writes this rom-com, right? So Emma goes and tries to help this guy, and he is just a miserable piece of shit. Can I say I am sympathetic to his plight, especially at the end of the book when we learn why he is the way he is. It doesn't excuse the way that he treats the heroine throughout the course of the story. I got a comment on the video where I talked about this book, and someone actually said that they found this book to be kind of like a quiet romance where the moments were built in these small moments, and I just don't think that's really the case. I mean, you could definitely make that argument, but I feel like this book was just devoid of romance. The hero multiple times says that she is basically a loser for not pursuing her dreams, even though he knows nothing about her or her life circumstances. He belittles her talent. He denies anything about their relationship, whether it's their physical relationship or their working relationship to his ex-wife. He is just not a fun person to read about. And I am all for a grumpy sunshine romance when the guy has a reason to be grumpy, and he certainly does have a reason to be grumpy that we find out about early on in the book, so at least it's like kind of justified. But also, is it really justified? I feel like that is something that, and Another person commented that they see sometimes in romance it's a red flag for them. You have a hero who is using his trauma to justify his shitty behavior. That's like a pattern of abusers, like people trying to justify their shittiness, that kind of thing. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not here to psychologize. That does seem like a potentially problematic behavior at the very least. And I just like, how is that romantic? It's upsetting. I was really hoping to see this hero's transformation from this like dick to someone who is deeply romantic, sympathetic, apologetic towards our heroine and her life circumstances. And I don't really believe that ever happens. Like, sure, there's a grand gesture at the end, but it was not enough to make this romantic. And over 50% of the book is spent with him being an actual asshole with no relationship development. Start changing after the 50% mark, but not enough. A cool premise. Dude, that's it. That's a cool premise does not excuse you from having to like write character development and write people falling in love, which is ironic considering that was like the point of this book, was like the heroine's gonna teach the hero how to write a rom-com because she knows all about it. Moving on to a book that I loved and I did think had quiet moments and I did think was really delightful, Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. This is Ali's first, I would say, real foray into sort of like melancholy erotic romance, if you will. This book I felt was really deeply romantic and it was not a rom-com. It felt so tonally different than anything that she has ever written before, and I would be so curious to see people's thoughts and opinions on this book who have not enjoyed her other stuff, because it just feels totally different. I know a couple of y'all have commented that you did enjoy this and you haven't enjoyed her other stuff, and then vice versa, so I think this is going to be one that's hard to really like recommend to people because it's a quieter romance. It's a book that doesn't fit her normal formula, and it's like once you've read this, I can't really recommend other Ali Hazelwood books because they feel so different, but digress. This book is about our two main characters, Rue and Eli. Rue is working at a like food science, food technology company. She got recruited by a woman in STEM who had like some like kind of controversy surrounding her in a sense. Like the university that this person used to study at tried to take her technology or whatever. She ended up winning her patent back. I don't know, just a big inspiration for Rue. So she ends up recruiting Rue to this technology business, whatever. And Rue's a pretty loyal person. She loves the company she works for and she's having just a really good time living her life. She does have some trauma in her past. She is not a super likable, quirky heroine like Ali Hazelwood's other ones, but things in her life start getting a little more complicated, a little more messy when Eli and his company try to take over the company that Rue works at. And this is hard because, again, Rue really enjoys the person that she works for and that owns this company, and she feels like she's a traitor as she starts falling for Eli. I just loved the way that this book was executed. It felt so different, honestly, than anything I've ever read before. This book is very heavy on the sex, and the sex is the way that these two characters connect, and it felt right for them. And I think, again, that is something that I don't see often enough in books, is authors considering when they're writing sex scenes or writing a romance, how the characters really fit into that equation. It's not a one-size-fits-all equation. Some characters are going to have sex really early on in a book. Some characters are going to have sex really late in a book, and it just really depends on their personalities. I feel like often what I see is that authors write these characters who are a little bit more reluctant to fall in love and or are inexperienced with love and then are like jumping into bed together at the beginning of the book. It just feels incongruous with what the author's trying to build. This book, I think, does a good job because Rue is someone who is really reluctant to fall in love. She has trauma in her past. She has a lot that she's dealing with and going through and is not looking for connection. She only really does hookups. Getting to know our hero through these hookups, I think, actually really makes sense for their relationship and helps soften Rue to this idea of a romantic relationship. And Eli is kind of all in from the beginning. He's very into Rue and is very charmed by her personality and her withholding, honestly. I loved seeing them connect to the sex. The sex was consensual. The sex was hot. The sex was very communicative. And I'd never really seen, honestly, sex executed in this way. I thought it was the definition of sex carrying a story forward, and I couldn't be more grateful for it. I really, really enjoyed this book, and I found Rue to be a deeply relatable character. Insecurities and the way that she carries herself, I just found, again, just so deeply relatable. I loved this book. I think this is going to be like an all-time favorite and or favorite of the year. I think I said that I wasn't sure if this is going to be like all-time favorite of the year material, but I think I can say firmly that I believe that it is. It's the first book this year that I've read that I really, truly 100% connected with. Although I do really love Just for the Summer as well. I think these two are like top contenders for me currently. And I am actually going to be doing a like kind of mid-year favorites video coming soon. It'll be this month at some point. Let's move on, shall we? Everyone I Kissed Since You Got Famous. This one is interesting. I read this for my June new release romance video, and I was really excited about it because it is a queer romance about two women now, but girls earlier. Two girls who knew each other in high school who have now grown up. One is a like famous TikToker who doesn't really know what she's doing with her life, and the other girl or woman, Kate, is now a really, really famous actress. She has gone through a really tough breakup because she was groomed by like a really famous actor director who was like, I think like 18 years her senior or something to that effect, maybe 14 years. He was older, he was kind of a creep, and now she is trying to like not necessarily rebuild her reputation, but kind of recover from this and like forge her own path forward, right? Because she's always been kind of associated with this guy since her rise, and now that she's no longer with this guy, she can kind of do her own thing. But for Christmas, she ends up going home trying to write her screenplay, and she ends up getting help from her childhood friend. They also do some like snooping into this like rumor that they knew from high school, basically like one of their high school teachers who they thought was a creep. They think he's living a double life. They want to examine this. I'm not really sure. This book was one of the most bizarre ones I've read in a long time. Not in the plot, but in the execution. These characters have been apart for so many years, and then they come together in a way that I thought was a little bizarre. They're like hanging out and immediately start talking about their sexuality, about their gender, about who they fucked, kind of. I don't know. This book is weird in that these characters and their relationship moves way too fast. I know we could make jokes about how sapphic relationships tend to move quickly, but like it was strange the way that this book moved quickly. I feel like this book could have been fun in like rediscovering each other, quirks, but I think oftentimes in second chance romance is really hard to pull off unless we have flashbacks, because a lot of the present day is going to feel weird because you're either going to have like an insta-love situation or a pick back up where we left off situation, and it just doesn't feel convincing because romance and love is about honesty, is about communication, and neither of those things are really present if you're telling me that these people used to know each other and then many years later they're willing to just spill their guts. Like, honesty is an earned thing, right? Like, confession is an earned thing. It feels weird for these characters to just be spilling their guts. Anyway, didn't really enjoy this one, I'm gonna be honest. I give it like 2 stars, 3 stars. Moving on to our last 2 books, both of which were stinkers. I know, I've been talking about a lot of stinkers, though I did have an all-time favorite, so I feel like it kind of balances out, does it not? The Duchess by Sophie Jordan was a book that I was reading for a list video. I know. This one I think is supposed to be like part of the most anticipated romances of 2024 or something to that effect, like new release romances. This book is about Valencia and Rain. Valencia's husband was a duke and he ended up passing away. He was an abusive piece of shit, and we get a lot of flashbacks to him, which is just so delightful. She is living in her house, the house that she had with her husband, just honestly having a great time until the new duke, the guy who actually inherits the title, comes to this house and is like, hey, well, I know you're living here, but I have 6 unmarried sisters and a mom, and they want to live here, so you're gonna have to get the fuck out. And she is really taken aback by this because she really thought she'd get to live her life in peace after being abused by this piece of shit guy for so many years, like finally getting to live in peace, but unfortunately her peace is robbed of her. And the dower house that she could go to is like far away from her friends, and just like not the vibe. So she kind of strikes a deal with this duke and is like, hey, I'll help your sisters be a little bit more refined and be able to enter into society if you let me stay in this house. Technically it's him that offers this up to her, but she gladly accepts his invitation, and over the course of the story they fall in love. Wow. Everybody clap. Everybody clap. What an interesting storyline. Here's my problem with this book. Twofold. One, the heroine isn't really looking to fall in love. She's looking to get her panties wet. I respect it, I sure do, especially after the shit she's been through, but it wasn't really that fun. I didn't really love the way that their relationship was built. She goes from kind of hating this guy, kind of thinking he's a piece of shit, to basically like entering his bedchambers and like fucking his brains out. It just felt a little incongruous, I suppose, with everything that had been built prior. It just felt weird. And then also, why did we have repeated flashbacks to the abuse? Can someone please tell me? What fucking purpose does that serve? Except for to make me deeply uncomfortable, and I'm sure a lot of other readers. I think obviously this is not going to be a book for you if you have been through domestic violence. However, I personally think that there's no reason to really do this at all, right? Like, why do we have to have this in-depth flashback shit in the book at all? Maybe one flashback, okay, sure, but breaking up the rest of the book with these flashbacks to like this one particular party where, why are we doing this? It's awful. I don't appreciate that. Not romantic or sexy. In fact, it's like killing the vibe. It's like total boner killer. Moving on to the last book I read this month, and one where I'm probably gonna go the fuck off, okay? I admittedly will. Change of angle. Do we love this stunning background? This is where I've been filming the whole time. Beautiful nature. My camera's overheating, so you get to see this like slightly double chinny angle of me. You're welcome. Let's talk about my Oxford year. My book I hated. What to say about this one that hasn't already been said? A lot, actually. A lot, because I'm actually kind of upset that people recommended this book to me. Upset that I read it, and I'm upset that it exists. Actually, okay, I wouldn't say that I'm upset that it exists. This book's by Julia Whalen, audiobook narrator extraordinaire. This is her first book, her debut novel. I have read her second novel, which I really fucking enjoyed. I thought it was romantic, I thought it was charming, and kind of quiet. It was like a nice, quiet romance. This book, however, I did not enjoy at all. It's about our two main characters, Ella and Jamie. I think his name's Jamie? That seems like not really what we called him. I can't remember. Ella is short for Eleanor. Ella is 24. She has graduated university. She is a political consultant. She decides she's going to go to Oxford to get her master's in literature or a PhD in literature, one of the two. And while she's there, she ends up falling for her literature professor or whatever. Advisor? I'm not really sure. There's someone who's supposed to teach her. That person is no longer there when she gets there, and she's like, what the fuck? And this guy kind of like rubs her the wrong way at first, and then she's like, oh, but wait, actually you're kind of sexy. And then they engage in sexual intercourse. Neither of them really wants a romantic entanglement, but they kind of fall into one after having sex repeatedly. 50% mark of this book, we get the shock of our lives, I think, when we understand why he is not really wanting to be in a romantic relationship. It changes the whole trajectory of this book, the whole course of our lives as we know it. And I am upset that there is no trigger warning, that there is no real explanation in the synopsis of this book as to what is going to unfold. And so I'm going to tell you, and I am so sorry if this is a spoiler. I'm actually not sorry. I don't give a shit. He has cancer. His brother had cancer and died of it. He also has cancer, and he is kind of dying from it. Probably not going to die though, because he like caught it early. And our heroine feels bad for him, and also is like, oh my god, this guy I've been like having really great sex with is going to die. I need to like get closer to him and like love on him and make sure he doesn't die. And there's tension within the family too, because obviously this guy's brother died, and his parents are really encouraging him to get like special treatment that he doesn't really want to undergo. She is supportive of whatever he wants, so his family kind of doesn't like her at first, and they all kind of grow to love each other over the course of the book, blah, blah, blah. I felt a little bait and switched with this book, right? It doesn't necessarily promise that this is going to be a story without hardship. I just don't really like stories that try to frame disability or illness as a reason to die. It's like a moment in this book, I'm pretty sure, where our heroine is kind of faced with whether or not she should let him pass away. I think he has like pneumonia at some point in the book. He's immunocompromised, obviously, from the chemo and from the cancer, but she and the dad kind of discuss whether or not they should let him go or whether they should like see what happens. And I'm like, why the fuck do you get to make that decision? And also I think there's like conversation she has with the hero at one point about like whether or not he wants to like keep living. And the thing, I think you should live life on your own terms. Like, I'm not telling you what you should do. I just think that the messaging is like kind of iffy at points in this book, with the comparisons made to Jojo Moyes' Me Before You. I don't like that. What was the purpose of this book? Was it trying to be a romance? I'm not quite sure. I didn't find it to be very romantic. I hesitate to say this, but the ending of the book sort of implies that the hero's going to die really early on. In a tragedy, like, can it be a romance if there's not really a happily ever after? But what does a happily ever after really entail, right? Does it mean like temporary happiness with someone? Does death at some point mean that it couldn't be a happily ever after? I don't know. This book does raise questions. I will say that. It does indeed raise questions. I just felt a little cheated because this book wasn't romantic, and I don't really like the setup of it. Here's the thing. I think hard things happen to people. Death, cancer, illness, disease, it's all sort of an inevitability at some point or other in our lives. And I don't think that we should not have cancer in books, right? Or that we shouldn't have discussions of these things in books, and what, you know, a healthy relationship looks like in the short term for people who are like terminal. Like, I don't think that these are bad things necessarily, but this book I felt didn't execute well on anything. The fact that our heroine was just fucking this guy, and then when he got cancer, she was like, oh, I'll be there for you forever. That's not really romantic to me. I don't know. I'm losing steam here. I'm honestly kind of like forgetting what I hated about this book, but I did actually vlog about this one, and you can hear more of my thoughts and feelings, my firsthand account, if you will, over in that vlog, which I'll link in the description down below. I have a vlog channel, by the way. I try to reiterate that because I think some of y'all see my vlogs in my community posts, and you click on it and you watch it, and you're not really realizing it's a totally different channel. I thought I'd point that out for you. And I'd also point out that I gave that book 2 stars, and that is the last book that I'm talking about in this here video. Other things I want to tell you are other books that I read and places you can find those videos, and also what you have to look forward to this month, right? So if you want to hear my thoughts on 2 KU romances, both titled Face Off, check out my hockey romance vlog. Link in the description down below. If you want to know how a Star Wars virgin feels about the Star Wars movies, and you want to hear me talk about science fiction books and my thoughts on Dune, go check out my Can Girls Like Science Fiction video. That one I don't think got enough love, and that's okay, but I thought it was really fun, so I feel like you should go check that out if you have missed that one. If you would like to hear about A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston, you do want to hear my thoughts on that one. The Honey Witch or Forbidden Game by Madison Fox. My Patreon exclusive reading vlog where I read more June new release romances is over on Patreon, so you can go check it out there. And lastly, other books I didn't talk about, The London Seance Society and The September House. I'm doing a taste test this month for a fellow booktuber. I'd absolutely love to know in the comments down below if you, from those two books, can figure out who this booktuber is. That video should be live like next week, so stay tuned for that. Very excited about it. It's a juicy one. There's gonna be some like fantasy books in there, and I'm not a fantasy girl, so that'll be quite the ride. I say that. I'm actually going home after this video to read some romantasy. That has been a fascinating fucking journey, let me tell you. What else can you expect from me this month? Like I said, I'm doing a video where I tell you what books are my favorites so far this year. I'm doing a video where I talk about my DNF shelf, all the books that I've DNF'd, like scrolling through my schedule right now. There's so much to look forward to, my friends. Of course, I'm gonna be doing a July new release vlog at some point. I'm doing this like little TBR game at some point. There's fun stuff coming, is all I'm trying to say. Thanks so much for being here. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite book of the month is. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.